Good evening. Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Roselle Bloomingdale Virtual Candidate Forum for the November 3rd, 2020 general election. I am Roberta Barino, League President. Our webinar is being simulcast via Facebook Live and will be available on our website, www.lwvrb.org, as well as on the illinoisvoterguide.org website. Our nonpartisan policy is as follows. The League of Women Voters of Roselle Bloomingdale does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The purpose of candidate forums and debates is to allow voters the opportunity to hear candidates discuss issues face-to-face, to stimulate public interest in the campaign, and to provide the candidates an opportunity to engage with their constituents. Events of this nature are important for the education of voters as well as the political process in general. First, a word from our sponsor. The League of Women Voters of Illinois is holding a virtual gathering entitled Power the Vote to benefit the League of Women Voters Education Fund on Thursday, September 24th from noon to 1 p.m. Join us for inspiration and motivation. Our panel of experts will explore what needs to be done to activate and protect the vote and achieve equity at the ballot box. The public is welcome. You can register via a link on the LWVRB website. And one last plug. LWVRB is hosting a webinar entitled What the Fair Tax Would Do for Illinois on Tuesday, October 6th at 7 p.m. Check our website or Facebook page for details. Questions for tonight's forum were solicited via email in advance of this event, and we received a great response. We do have a very limited capacity to address additional questions via text. We will share the phone number with you in a moment. We will do our best to address questions submitted tonight. Time is of the essence, so let's get going. I'd like to introduce our League-trained moderator, Erin Roper, from the League of Women Voters of Homewood Flossmoor. Erin also happens to be the chairperson of the upcoming Power the Vote event, so we know it's going to be a great event. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you, Roberta. As you said, I am Erin Roper from the League of Women Voters here in the South Suburbs, Homewood Flossmoor area. We thank everyone for joining us this evening, and we hope you will find it to be most informative. Candidate forums such as this one, sponsored by the volunteers for the League of Women Voters of Roselle Bloomingdale, provide a nonpartisan venue to give the general public an opportunity to participate in the electoral process by asking questions of the candidates about issues that concern them. This is a terrific opportunity for civic discourse, and I encourage you to ask your questions of the candidates. Recordings of this event, whether they be in person or off a computer screen, may not be used without the express written approval of the League. The League will only allow audio-video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by the media reporting on the event. For tonight's virtual format, we directed those interested to email questions to the League in advance. Forum attendees may send additional questions via text to 630-283-2894. These questions are being monitored by League volunteers to be read by the moderator. The League, as a general practice, conducts candidate forums in this manner to ensure the questions are appropriate and to avoid duplication of questions, as well as to maximize the time we have allotted. We will do our best to read each question asked. The candidates have tossed a coin to determine who will give their opening statement first. Then once we start reading questions, the second candidate will answer first, and so on back and forth to the end. We will continue to rotate who answers the question first after that. Candidates' questions and responses are timed. I am to enforce the timing, so I may have to interrupt in order to keep things fair and equal. League does not condone empty chair debates. In the case that an invited candidate cannot make it to the forum and there is only one other candidate, then the participating candidate will have the opportunity to make a 3-minute introduction, but will not receive any questions. On behalf of the League of Women Voters in the audience, we thank the candidates for participating. Please join me in thanking the volunteers from the League of Women Voters of Roselle Bloomingdale who are here in the background to assist with timing, collection, and sorting your questions for the candidates. Tonight, you will meet candidates for the DuPage County Board District 1 and state representative for the 45th District. Okay, let's get started. As I said earlier, in the case that an invited candidate cannot make it to the forum and there is only one other candidate, the participating candidate will have the opportunity to make a 3-minute introduction, but will not receive any questions. Only one of the candidates for DuPage County Board District 1 replied to our invitation to attend this forum. Zara Saratwala, the Democratic candidate, is here tonight and will be given 3 minutes to introduce herself. Welcome, Zara.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Yes, so I'm Zara Saratwala. I'm running for DuPage County Board here in District 1. I've lived in Elmhurst for about 13 years, and I am from originally the Northwest suburbs. I have my master's in English Lit from Loyola University, Chicago. I'm a professor of English at Elgin Community College, and I'm a wife and mom. So I'm running because I feel we need diverse representation at all levels of government. We need voices from various professions, backgrounds, perspectives. We need empathy, kindness, determination, and common sense. We need a new generation of leadership for DuPage County. And if we can bring a more balanced representation, we will see an improved quality of life for DuPage residents. A few of the issues I'm running on. I think that we need increased transparency and accountability, as well as accessibility to our elected officials. When I say accessibility, I mean we need to push info out to the residents, and I think that the onus is on the elected officials to do so. We need to make sure that our constituents know what is being discussed and what is being voted upon, because with knowledge comes agency. I also think that when it comes to accountability and transparency, we need to do away with no-bid contracts, aka pay to play. These are legal but unethical. Sometimes the items that don't go out to bid make sense, such as bulk low rates for trucks or big equipment, but the issue is when a professional service, such as engineering, for example, is not subject to bid. And then you find that multiple board members or the chairman have received donations from that vendor. Basically, sometimes it's clear why a certain vendor deserves the contract and sometimes it's not. There's too much question and not enough transparency. Committee appointments also need to be posted, like jobs, the way our neighboring counties do. Right now, certain appointments are well compensated, and it's in the county's best interest that we have people in these roles who want to serve the county and are not being given these appointments because they have made certain kinds of donations. With your help, we can bring more kindness and common sense to local government. I'm looking forward to everyone getting out there and voting on or before November 3rd, and I'm full of hope and look forward to the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zara. Now for tonight's forum for District 45 State Representative. The candidates are the Democratic incumbent, Diane Pappas, and the Republican challenger, Seth Lewis. And would you please join us, candidates? Welcome.
Thank you.
Giving the first introduction is Mr. Seth Lewis. 2 minutes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for all that you've done to put this together. And for all of you out there watching, I greatly appreciate it. Forums like this are important. They allow voters to actually meet the candidate, even if it's over Zoom, and hear their perspectives, rather than seeing them through deceptive and sometimes derogatory TV ads that use inflammatory rhetoric. They demean opponent. So I'm grateful that you are here. At the conclusion of this forum, there should be a clear distinction between the two of us. And your vote in this election will determine the future of Illinois. I'm Seth Lewis. I'm an engineer. I'm a small business owner. I got 2 boys who are the 5th generation to live here in Illinois. And I am working to make our state a place people want to live instead of a place they want to leave. Some things I want you to know that differentiate me from my opponent. I will not vote for Michael J. Madigan as Speaker of the House. I will call for the resignation of any public official who is indicted and have already done so with local officials who are both Republican and those who are both on the Democratic side. I will support term limits for elected officials. And as mentioned, I have a State Farm insurance agency, so I will make my living and feed my family via working versus being a permanent politician. These are things that differentiate me from my opponent. She has voted for Michael Madigan and will continue to support him. My opponent has not called for any resignation of any elected official at this time. And my opponent does not support term limits from which we've been able to determine. I hope at the end of this forum, things are very clear and distinct, and I hope to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Representative Pappas.
Thank you so much. Again, I will reiterate, thank you so much for the League of Women Voters for allowing this forum. Often, when it comes to our state and local candidates, voters simply don't have enough information to make informed decisions, and so forums like this are critical. So thank you to everybody who tuned in and who is going to be watching down the road. I'm Diane Pappas. I've lived in our district since I moved here from what was then communist Poland at the age of 11. My wonderful teachers at our public schools at Army Trail Elementary and Roselle Middle School and Lake Park High School taught me not just the new language, but gave me the skills to earn an full ride academic merit scholarship to Michigan State University, where I graduated with 2 BA degrees with honors. I went on to the Yale Law School, where I earned my law degree, and then I came back right to the district. I married, and my husband and I moved to Itasca, where we've lived for the past 23 years. I've also worked for many local companies as in-house counsel, and there I've negotiated many agreements, and I worked with C-suite members of the company to help them make business decisions. And so I feel that I know the intersection of the law and business, and I can be a strong advocate for this district in Springfield. Some of my achievements in my first term were passing a bill that has been languishing in the House for a while that allows our small DuPage County communities to use hotel motel tax dollars that are already being collected from people outside of the district to complete infrastructure and capital improvement projects without increasing our property taxes. I also reached across the aisle and worked with a Republican senator to pass a law that is the first in the nation that increases fire safety, both for pets and firefighters following a tragic fire in West Chicago. So I have been bipartisan. I've worked to increase funding to our schools, and I look forward to representing our district again in my second term with your help.
Thank you. Now for the first question, which will go to Representative Pappas. You have 1 minute to answer after I stop reading, of course. Are there state measures that can be taken to respond to cries of defund the police?
I believe that there are definitely steps that we can take as a legislature, but I think the most important thing that we can do as legislature is listen to our constituents, both the public and the law enforcement community, to find out what best practices are out there and what we can implement to deal with the situation that we've encountered in the past month. We've seen some videos of terrible violence being perpetrated by some law enforcement officers, and certainly that does not reflect on all law enforcement. And then in response, we've seen some really bad action on the part of some bad actors in terms of destruction of personal property. And violence on either side is not the answer. I believe that we have answers. I have spoken with members of the community and law enforcement community. I've listened to what practical solutions have been implemented in our district already. I'm eager to share those with my colleagues in Springfield, and I believe that we can all work together to come up with a comprehensive solution.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
I am open to understanding how resources can be redeployed within our law enforcement departments to better serve the public and maintain the level of public safety that we have here in the 45th district. However, very clear, I am against the calls to defund the police. I support our police officers. They are good men and women that have difficult jobs. They protect us, and any motivation to undermine them, I completely reject. Those issues that are happening outside the 45th district, those mayors have local control and can implement things that they want to. in order to improve their police departments. But when I look at the police departments in the 45th district, we are very, very good, and I reject all calls to defund them.
Thank you. Next question. 920,000 out of 1.6 million Illinois students are starting the school year fully remotely, and just 9 of 105 suburban school districts are returning students to school full-time this fall. What must the legislature do now to ensure that every student has a computing device and internet access at home? Mr. Lewis?
So many on this forum may not know, but my wife is the superintendent of schools, and she deals every day with children having devices as well as connectivity issues. Talking with superintendents such as her, those in the district which I reached out to, the computing devices is not the issue. What is the issue is the connectivity being brought to from our either Xfinity or AT&T here in the 45th district and others around state. An out-of-box concept that I think we need to look at is back in the early 1900s, things such as water, electricity, natural gas when it was available. Those were luxury items. We're now seeing broadband and internet needs to transfer from a luxury item into more of a utilitarian supply to help all our youth and those in education. And that's the legislative approach I would take.
Thank you. Representative Pappas.
Well, I absolutely agree. We are in unprecedented times right now, and regardless of economic situation or availability of equipment, all families are facing difficulties with remote learning. So it is critical that we provide the infrastructure and the equipment that our students need. Of course, nothing can be done instantaneously, but I have supported the state investment in infrastructure, especially broadband expansion throughout the state that will reach some of our communities that right now do not have a good support network. But I'm also heartened by the fact that we have seen great cooperation among private businesses like Comcast and AT&T, who have opened up their Wi-Fi portals to students, and also other taxing bodies like libraries who are trying to help our students get the connectivity that they need to succeed in school during these very, very challenging times.
Thank you. Next question. If the fair tax referendum fails to pass, how and where should cuts be made? For example, should cuts be made to mandated special education services or mental health screening as required by state law? Or if the fair tax referendum passes, what are your priorities for how the additional revenue should be allocated?
Thank you for that question. Right, thank you for that question. When the legislature voted to place the tax referendum on the ballot, we were in an entirely different economic circumstance. And at the time, the idea was that the revenue generated by a graduated income tax from the top 3% of our income earners in the state would be incremental. Obviously, COVID changed everything. We are facing a revenue crisis of an unprecedented type. And where the referendum to pass, we're no longer looking at an incremental additional revenue. We're looking to fill in some of the gaps that have been caused in our revenue streams by COVID-19. So I'm definitely not interested in discussing how we're going to increase our spending when we don't have enough funds right now to provide the crisis spending that we need to help our middle class families when they find themselves in such desperate needs. I would definitely support funding all of the necessary interventions for our middle class families.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
So I'm going to take the questions in order. What would we cut, and then what would we use the monies for, correct, Erin?
Yes.
So even if it passes, I'm going to go down there to cut a tax that has been burdensome to Illinois. It's called the corruption tax. And what we find with our politicians in Illinois is that they are making deals, most recently with ComEd, that has cost the state $2.3 billion in a bailout. And we need to go down there. We need to cut that tax, whether or not the graduate tax passes or not. It's estimated by other outside groups as there's anywhere from 500 million to 1 billion in corruption. So that's what I'm going to cut. If the graduate tax passes, I do agree with Representative Pappas. We need to fill all our budget holes as well as fund the unfunded pension mandate. No new programs should be initiated.
Thank you. Next question. Where do you rank additional funding for the evidence-based school funding model? Mr. Lewis?
As again, being married to an educator who services a district with 75% free and reduced lunch and minority-based, funding education is extremely important to me. The recent Senate bill that was passed allocated an increase in spending, I believe close to $3.7 billion over 10 years, incrementing in incremental steps of $370 million a year. That is a top priority for me. Our youth and the support services they get from the local communities and educational communities is extremely important to the success of Illinois.
Thank you. Representative Pappas.
I think on this, we both agree. It is absolutely critical that we fund education in our state, and helping increasing that funding for our schools from the state is absolutely one of my top priorities. As I mentioned, my success is due in large part to the public schools in our district. And I want to make sure that every student that is in school right now has the same opportunities that I had. And that is true for students across Illinois. I believe that the additional funding that the state will provide will have a twofold benefit. One is to better fund education, but two, also it will hopefully help us reduce the property tax burden on homeowners, because right now schools are too reliant on property taxes for our funding. So I am absolutely 100% making it a top priority that, to the extent funds are available, we prioritize our schools.
Thank you. Next question. Your first vote as a state representative will be for the Speaker of the House. Michael Madigan has said he's not resigning any of his leadership positions and intends on seeking the nomination as Speaker of the House for the 102nd General Assembly beginning in January 2021. If elected, will you vote for Michael Madigan as Speaker of the House? Why or why not? Representative Pappas.
Thank you for the question. I will vote for the best person who is nominated for the job. And as a Democrat, I will vote for the best Democrat nominated for the job. Right now, it's impossible to know who is going to be the nominee from the Democratic caucus for the job of Speaker. I do not know if anyone will be challenging Speaker Madigan for that position, but my intention is to vote for the best person that is nominated by our caucus.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
That's pretty easy for me. I appreciate Representative Pappas sidestepping the issue, but I don't see anyone challenging the longest serving Speaker of the House in the country. He's been there 35 years and he says he's going to be there. So I plan on giving this panel a direct answer, which my opponent just did not, and that is I will vote no for Michael Madigan. I believe he has served too long. I believe it's impossible to make this state a place where people want to live again with him in leadership. I understand why my opponent, though, can't say anything, because she has just received close to $1 million from the Speaker. Her campaign is entirely funded. She claims to clean up corruption, but she's using Michael Madigan's money in order to get her message out. It doesn't add up. So unequivocally, the answer is no. I will vote for Michael Madigan. Will not vote for Michael Madigan.
Thank you. The Illinois Senate established term limits for its leaders in 2017. Do you support term limits for the Speaker and Minority Leader of the House? And that goes to you, Mr. Lewis.
I absolutely support term limits for leadership. I support term limits for all levels of government in leadership, both local and at the State House. I think our legislators should not serve anywhere for more than 10 to 12 years overall. That would be 5 terms as a House member. Gets a little complicated in the Senate where it's either 2 or 3 terms, depending on where they're at. But I'm very much an advocate of term limits for leadership and for being an elected official in the legislative body.
Thank you. Representative Pappas.
So in terms of term limits, as someone who came from a rather undemocratic country, I actually believe that term limits limit the ability of the people to choose their representatives. And so I'm not a big fan of term limits. However, if the term limits, if the majority of our district wanted term limits, I would certainly vote for that. In terms of leadership, I think it's up to each chamber to decide what the rules of that chamber are, and the Senate has decided for themselves that they wanted term limits. We can certainly do that in the House of Representatives. We would need a vote on that. I don't believe, I mean, the minority leader at this point has exceeded the number of terms that that candidate Lewis has says is optimal. So I'm curious whether he would vote for him as Speaker of the House, since he is being funded by Minority Leader Durkin. It's an interesting question, and in terms of where I'm getting my funding from, it is not from the Speaker, it's from the Democratic Party of Illinois.
Okay, thank you. Next question, we're going to shift gears a little bit here. Federal immigration enforcement agents often pursue immigrants with no criminal record outside immigration violations. As a result, immigrant families often feel unsafe pursuing education for themselves and their children, seeking medical care, going to court, seeking other services. What is your position on empowering schools, medical facilities, and courthouses to turn away ICE agents and to restrict police cooperation with federal immigration enforcement? Representative Pappas.
I believe that to the extent that our law enforcement agencies are funded and have their own mandates, that they should perform the mandates for which they are funded. We have ICE in place, and it is funded by police enforcement officers are tasked with different roles. To the extent that those overlap, I absolutely believe that they should work together, but to the extent that they don't, I believe that our local tax dollars should support police fulfilling their mandate on a local level and not act, we're talking about defunding the police. I certainly don't want to defund the police by having them perform functions that are better funded and performed by federal law enforcement officers.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
So I have actually reached out to many in the educational and the hospital and medical world, and the politicalization, I guess, of ICE is not right. I believe our local law enforcement needs to work with our federal government. Things are becoming more connected. I don't believe in the concept of sanctuary cities and the concept that you can be here illegally performing crimes and not have any consequence to that. But those in the medical, educational environments, they're not calling ICE. They're getting the people the help and resources that they need. So the question that's being asked, I think, doesn't even exist in society, especially in the 45th district.
Thank you. Next. Legislative leaders sometimes exploit the self-funding campaign finance loophole to distribute party funds to their chosen candidates. What is your view on taking campaign donations from party leadership? How should candidates finance their campaigns? Mr. Lewis.
So I will freely admit that I am taking monies from Leader Durkin to fund my campaign. I would like to see an even playing field, though, because right now things are stacked against the Republican Party. Michael Madigan has $25 million at his disposal, just reported today, and Leader Durkin has 1/10 of that, at about 2.5 million. Special interests are picking and choosing who they want elected. So I am open to all sorts of reforms and closing loopholes and not allowing a single individual to utilize his power and influence as he sees fit. Like I said before, the Democratic Party, its chair is Michael Madigan. The Democratic, the Madigan's Fund, they are supporting my opponent. So I'm open to reform.
Thank you. Representative Pappas.
Yeah, I'm often to campaign funding reform as well, and I wish we could take all the money out of politics. I wish we could publicly fund our campaigns. I think that would absolutely level the playing field. Unfortunately, with the Supreme Court's recent decisions, it doesn't seem as though we're going to have a chance to do that, at least until laws are passed on the federal level that would allow it. So in the meantime, I think it's interesting. I think Mr. Lewis has an interesting approach to this. He certainly did not mind when Bruce Rauner, as a billionaire, funded the Republican Party and funded his own campaign, previous campaigns. As he admits today, he's taken direct money from his party leadership. And the only thing that he seems to be complaining about is that that he is not getting the kind of support that candidates like me are getting. But I am getting the support because people believe in what I stand for and the kinds of legislation that I am going to champion in Springfield.
$2 million.
Thank you. All right, here we go with another one. Do you support empowering the legislative inspector general to investigate ethics violations and to publish its findings without asking permission from the legislators it is commissioned to oversee? Representative Pappas.
I think that the Inspector General has a very important job. And I know that this is one of the reforms that is being considered by the committee that is set up to talk about ethics reforms. And I am looking forward to getting their report and recommendations. I don't know that I alone am in a perfect position to understand the full implications of that particular reform. And so I'm looking to hear feedback from constituents and from other legislators. But I do think that we need comprehensive ethics reforms in Illinois. And certainly one of the things that we need to do is to make sure that we don't allow people who've committed crimes to take pensions from the Illinois state government, and that we review what the legislators are doing that is improper.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
Forgive me, dear. My computer blacked out on my screen, so I was trying to fix that. Could you
That's all right. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Sure. Do you support empowering the legislative inspector general to investigate ethics violations and to publish its findings without asking permission from the legislators it is commissioned to oversee?
Absolutely, 100%. When you look at the recent scandals that have occurred, Michael Madigan is the easiest one to point to. My former opponent in 2018, Tom Cullerton, he's up on federal indictment charges. We just saw Terry Link resign from the Senate due to federal indictment and tax evasion charges. Sandoval, Arroyo, the list goes on and on and on. And the reason we've allowed this, or this corruption has been continuously allowed to occur, is because there's been no enforcement. There's no independent body to come into the legislature and say, hey, you're doing something wrong. And we don't have to listen to those in charge. And when you have that type of environment, that's wrong. The LA needs to be given a little oomph to its position, and not just be there to pacify what they think voters want.
Thank you. Next question. What will you do to fight racism in Illinois? Mr. Lewis.
Racism is it's absolutely here. It's an individual choice. There is a difference between systematic racism and individual racism. When it comes to systematic racism, we need to make sure that those who are impoverished or of brown, African American descent have the opportunities. For those who don't know, my kids are brown. My wife is from India. So I strive to make sure everything that they participate in is looked at by their skills and what they're able to accomplish, not by the color of their skin. Individual, I call that out. And all of us as individuals, when we see that type of behavior, we need to make sure we're calling it out.
Thank you. Representative Pappas?
So starting right in my own office, I have a staff who is of different racial backgrounds. I am absolutely committed to equal treatments for all individuals in the state of Illinois and in the United States, regardless of color of skin, religion, economic background, and racism is here. Systemic racism is here. And we need to acknowledge it. We need to understand the background of it. And we need to understand that it is not simply a matter of people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps if they are constantly being pushed down from above. So we need to create opportunities for great education for all of our residents, great job development, great economic development, so that they can achieve that equality that we all strive for.
Thank you. This next one is just a little long, so listen hard. Immigrant communities have been especially vulnerable and have seen a disproportionately high rate of infection and death from COVID-19. Would you support access to health care regardless of immigration status, economic relief and access to safety net services for all communities regardless of immigration status? For example, tax rebates and credits, unemployment insurance, paid sick and family leave, and other emergency support. That will go to Ms. Pappas.
Right. So of course, no one is in favor of people violating the law. And in terms of paid family leave for people who are not authorized to work in the United States, it's difficult for us to pass a law that allows someone who is not allowed to work in the United States to take advantage of work benefits. I will say, however, when it comes to things like healthcare and food resources, we in effect are going to pay for those services regardless of what happens, because immigrants will utilize emergency services and those will be covered by taxpayer dollars. And so we do have to think about what is going to be a better investment in terms of our community. Would preventive services help us save money in the long run for our taxpayers? It's something that I think should be studied and should be carefully considered.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, your response.
So with those who are here illegally, if they are unhealthy, if they have health issues, if they are starving, if they need help to be safe, we all have an obligation to help those people. They're here, they're our neighbors. they are with us. And that's just being a human and exhibiting kindness. When it gets into other areas that this question gets into, now you're talking about utilizing resources that could go to those that could be provided to those here legally who are working, such as, the Family Paid Leave Act or other job-related issues. I'll take Pappas's, my opponent's legal position on that. It's probably hard to pass a law for something that's here illegally, but it doesn't mean we have to be uncompassionate.
Thank you. Okay, next question. What is your view of how Governor Pritzker has handled the COVID-19 crisis in Illinois? And what should we be doing differently? Mr. Lewis.
I have been on record, Sun Times interview actually, I gave the governor a B-. When the COVID crisis came out, we had no idea what we were dealing with. Hospitalization rates were increasing. I talked to some of my friends whose children are frontline nurses. They were seeing things in hospitals that they had never seen before. The death rate was rising. So I do applaud his initial actions to shut things down and get us to a point where we can begin to manage this. However, that was approximately March 15th. We are now in the middle of September, and we were led to believe that we were going to follow the science. However, the science is not connected. We're now talking about positivity rates versus hospitalization rates. The bar continues to change and be lifted.
Thank you. I'm sorry, your time's up. Representative Pappas.
I would agree with Mr. Lewis that the governor in the initial stages made some very difficult decisions, but they were decisions driven by the need to protect the lives of the people of Illinois and to protect some of our most valuable resources, which were our frontline workers and our essential workers who are out there making sure that we could continue to function even during a shutdown order. I think that it's always easy to look back with 2020 hindsight and new information and second guess decisions that were made in the thick of the moment with very little information available. I don't agree that the goal lines are necessarily being moved at the moment. The governor did pull out the phased plan. It involved a number of different matrices. The hospitalization rates in some areas were going up. The positivity rates were going up despite more testing. And so I think that we are in the midst of still figuring it out as we go along and getting more information.
Sorry, thank you. Next question. What ideas do you have to get deficit spending for the state under control? And that's you, Ms. Representative Pappas.
So the difficulty that we're faced with right now is, again, we are facing unprecedented revenue shortfalls due to this global health and economic crisis. It is impossible to talk about reining in deficit spending when the revenues fall short of funding the critical programs that the families in our state need in order to meet their housing, food, healthcare needs, schooling needs. So this is not the time to cut. I really believe that the government, in times like this, the government is the safety net. It's the bridge that gets people from crisis to the other side of the crisis. And the worst thing that we can do right now is cut services, vital services, and widen that chasm. So I will say that in the near term, during the next 2 years, I really don't see a way to generate enough revenues and cut the vital services that we need in order to significantly reduce the deficits.
Mr. Lewis.
Well, I can tell you, if that's the reality that my opponent says, I'm going to go down to the legislature though and still try to cut our deficits. And I'm going to do it as an engineer. My job on the production lines was to always try and find efficiencies, to always try and do more with less, to try and work smarter, not harder. And when you take an eye that way, you find things. I talked about the corruption tax we're facing. I've talked with other legislators. We have legacy programs that were instituted 30, 40 years ago that may not be as productive or efficient as they could be. Let's just look at our trying to pay unemployment. We're using old computer systems and people aren't able to get their unemployment benefits in time. There's obviously improvements and efficiencies that can be implemented to even deliver the services today using technology that are not being delivered. I'm going to try and cut our deficits.
Thank you. Next question. Legislator pay raises are defined as a continuing appropriation, which means the raises are on automatic pilot. Lawmakers who want to stop or change these automatic pay hikes must pass legislation to do so. What is your view on automatic pay raises in the legislature? And how should legislative pay increases be handled? Mr. Lewis.
I am opposed to automatic pay raises. I don't think they are good for the residents of Illinois. As I've stated before, I'm a small business owner as a State Farm Insurance Agency, and I'm able to do the job as a legislature because it's defined as a part-time job. My primary income and how I feed my family and support my lifestyle is due to my small business. It should not be as a legislator. I don't think they should exist, but the existing legislature has done so. And I think if we need a pay increase, we should vote on it separate from the budget.
Thank you. Representative Pappas.
Yeah, I agree that automatic pay raises are not necessary. They're built into our Constitution at the moment. But I actually am a co-sponsor of a bill that would allow legislators to, instead of taking their automatic increase, to funnel that money towards pensions and paying and investing in our pension system. So I would happily do that if the bill were called, and I would definitely vote for that. I do think, however, that in terms of the part-time status of the legislature, while that is a great theory, the truth is this is a full-time job. In order to provide the services that we need to constituents, we need to work year-round. To require, it's very difficult for people in certain careers to do this job as a part-time job and take the time off work that they need to be in Springfield and still continue working. Not everybody is a business owner, and I don't think that we want just business owners in the legislature. So I think we need to pay legislators a living wage.
Thank you. Candidates, this is the last question before your closing statement. Do you support lobbying reform, including stopping the revolving door? That's in quotation marks, revolving door, which is the practice of legislators leaving office and immediately becoming lobbyists. Representative Pappas.
I do favor reform, and I do favor a revolving door, eliminating the revolving door. I think that it makes sense to put in some time between the time when we're legislators and the time that we're going to potentially influence other legislators in their decision making. Having said that, I think that we need to be reasonable in how we apply that decision, because we don't want to create a situation where people, and I'm thinking specifically not just of legislators, but staff who have sometimes been included in these kinds of reforms, where they're unable to find alternative work after working for government. I think that that's unfair as well. And so I think that there is absolutely room for improvement in our current system, and we should reform it. And I look forward to discussing that with my colleagues in Springfield.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
I think we should close the window on the revolving door. I think it hurts the residents of Illinois, and I actually want to go one level further If you want to serve in government at any level, you should serve in government. If you want to be a lobbyist, you should be a lobbyist. But you should not be able to serve as an elected official and then lobby another branch or another level of government. We've seen the corruption that happens with that. There's an ongoing pattern here where lobbying, no term limits, full-time legislation, increasing pay. We need to correct some of these problems in Springfield. And I look forward to getting down there and talking with some of my colleagues about how we need to improve things.
Thank you. Well, our time is just about up, and we will give each candidate 1 minute for a closing statement. And we will start that closing statement with the person who went first at the beginning. So that would be you, Representative Pappas.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much for the forum. I really appreciated the debate that we had here tonight. I do want to say that as someone who has never been in politics before running for this office, and this being my first term in office, any office, I don't really have any intention of making this my career or in going into lobbying. I'm here because this district gave me a lot when I was a child. It gave me the ability to succeed. And this is my way of paying the district back, of being your advocate, being your voice. In my first term, I've worked with local governments. I've stood up for local control. I've worked with residents. I've filed bills for ideas on laws that were brought to me by my constituents. I am the voice of the people. And if you meet me and you talk to me, you'll know that I will give you an answer if you ask me a question. I don't hide anything, and I just want to do a good job for our district. I am absolutely committed to being your strong voice in Springfield.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
So at the beginning of this forum, and those who are out there watching, thank you for staying here to the end. I suggest that you're going to see a stark difference between myself and my opponent. We've answered questions where we've agreed on, those that are of compassion and human nature and education. And that's what we're there to do as elected officials. But how we want this process to work in Illinois, I think you can see a stark difference on our approaches to Michael Madigan, on our approaches to campaign finance reform, on our approaches to lobbying, on our approaches to corruption. You as the voters who are watching this, you have a choice. And I believe, and I applaud my opponent for taking stances that we disagree with, so you can make a choice. The goal is to make Illinois a place where people want to live. And that is what I intend to do. And I hope I have earned your vote tonight. And to the League of Women Voters, again, thank you for this diplomatic forum in which to share our views.
Thank you, both of you. This concludes our program. Once again, thank you for tuning in, everyone, and for your participation. I encourage you to learn more about the League by visiting their website at www.lwvrb.org. I'm now turning this back to Roberta for a few final remarks.
Thank you, Erin. Please remember to check our website. Once again, www.lwvrb.org. Like our Facebook page, consider becoming a member, and remind your friends and family to vote. Good night.